All right, so lesson 7 is about solving inequalities. Okay, and so we have to remember first about our inequalities, what that even means. So remember, our inequalities are the symbols that look like these. Okay, and so remember that when we're looking at an inequality, the big number is what's getting eaten, and the small number is on the outside. Okay, now when we're solving inequalities, we solve them just like we would normally solve a multiplication or a division problem. The only difference is that when there are negatives, we do have to do a little extra something when we're multiplying and dividing. And that only happens when we're multiplying and dividing with inequalities, okay? So let's look at some examples and then we'll talk about each one, okay? So let's look. Okay, so let's look at these couple examples right here. So 8x is less than or equal to 40. That's what this says. 8x is less than or equal to 40. So we divide this kind of problem because this is a multiplication problem, and whatever we see, we have to do the opposite. So they're dividing by 8, and they get x is less than or equal to 5. So this is perfect. Okay, this is just fine. All right, let's look at number 2. So d over 2 is greater than 7. All right, that's how you say that. Then because this is a division problem, we do the opposite. So we're going to multiply by 2. And so we get d is greater than 14. Okay? So let's look at a couple examples that we actually have to do ourselves. Okay, so let's look at A. So 4x is less than 40. Okay, so because this is a multiplication problem, right? We see multiplication. Then we're going to divide by 4. And so we get that x is less than 10. Okay. Now, if we were to graph this on a number line, okay, this is something we learned back in 6th grade. Okay, here's 10. Zeros over here with our negatives, bigger number, 20 up here, whatever. Okay. Now, so when it's just less than or equal to, we have, or sorry, when it's just less than or greater than, we have an open circle or an open dot. And when it's less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, we have a closed dot. So we would put an open circle here, an open dot at 10. And then this tells us that x is less than. So x is any number less than 10. So that would be all the way this way, getting to our negative numbers, right? Negative infinity. So it could be 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, all the way to -1, -5, -10, -100, negative infinity. Okay? All right. Let's look at letter B. So 6 is greater than or equal to x over 7. All right, so we see division. Remember, this is division. So we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to multiply by 7 to make these go away. And so we have less than, x is less than or equal to 42. Now here's where it gets a little confusing, because remember, I told you in previous lessons, we like our variable first. So I need to flip this around. Now be very, very careful when you're flipping this around. Look at what side is closer to the x. The small side is closer to the x. So it actually should look like this, right? Because the small side is closer to the x. So x is less than or equal to 42. Then when you go to graph it, here's your 42. Number 0 is always to your left. Positive infinity, right, is to your right. Okay, so now because it is equal to, we're going to have a closed circle at 42. And then what does it say? It's less than 42. So that's anything less than. Okay, so just be really careful that you're doing that. All right, so now let's look at some things that happen when there's negatives involved. Okay. Okay, so look what we have. We have negative 2g is less than 10. So then they divide by the negative 2, and then look what happens. Okay, it's no longer a less than. Now it's greater than. So any time that you multiply or divide by a negative, actually going to flip the inequality. Okay, so it's no longer less than, now it's greater than. And you can see that they've graphed it and they're showing you in the greater than direction. It works the same thing for division, right? See, they're multiplying by the negative 3. So what happened to the inequality? It flipped, right? It was less, now it's greater than. And so then when they go to graph it, it's a closed circle because it's equal to, and then it's greater than. Okay, so be very careful when you're dealing with your negatives. Okay, so let's look at C. So we have k over negative 2 is less than 9. Okay, so because it's division, we're going to multiply by negative 2. And the moment that you multiply by a negative, the inequality flips. So now we have greater than. K is now by itself. 9 times 2 is 18, and 1 negative stays negative. And so then when you graph that, here's negative 18. Okay, so now 0 is on the right side because we're on the negative side, so 0's got to be bigger. And here's negative infinity. Okay, so we have an open circle at negative 18, and then what does it say? It says that k is greater than. So if it has to be greater than negative 18, we've got to go to our right. We got to get to our positives to be greater. All right, so let's look at a couple more examples here. So negative 3n is less than or equal to negative 22. All right, so we have multiplication happening here, right? So we're going to divide by negative 3. Uh-oh, I'm dividing by a negative, which means my inequality needs to flip. So now not less than, now we are greater than or equal to. My negative 3's go away here, leaving me with n. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 22 divided by 3, now that's not a very nice number. 22 divided by 3 is 7.33333. Okay, so 7.3-ish. Okay, repeating. So then we graph that. Here's 7.3. 0 is now on your left because we got to go towards the negatives, and a positive infinity is to your right. It's equal to, so we're going to close that circle, and look what it says, n is greater, so we got to go bigger. Okay. Let's look at number 2. So t over negative 4 is less than negative 11. So because it's a division problem, we're going to multiply by negative 4. And because I'm multiplying by a negative, my inequality needs to flip. So the negative 4's go away, leaving me with my t. Negative times a negative is a positive. 11 times 4 is 44. All right, so now we graph that. 44 here. Zeros to your left, towards the negatives, and positive infinities to your right. It is just greater than, so we have an open circle, and it is greater, so we need to go bigger. Okay. So be very careful not to overgeneralize. Okay, so like look at number 3 here. 60 is less than or equal to m over 3. All right, so this is a division problem. So we're going to multiply by 3 so that my m is by itself. Now, why didn't I circle my inequality? Because I didn't have negatives involved. So I'm going to leave everything the same except for multiplying and getting 180. Okay? Now, remember, I don't like my variable at the end. I'm going to flip this around. But what's the inequality look like? The m is closer to the bigger side, so it needs to stay closer to the bigger side. Okay, so I just moved it around, almost as if I took my paper and looked on the opposite side, right? So m is greater than 180. So we graph that. Negative infinities to your left, positive infinities to your right. We have a closed circle because it's equal to, and m is greater, so we got to go bigger. Okay, so make sure that if you're dealing with negatives, you flip that inequality. If you're not, don't worry about it and move that variable to the beginning.